Journalists and media pundits love to talk about the dangers of college hookup culture. But are such depictions overblown? What is hookup culture? What are its implications? And what do college students think about the issue? All this tonight on Politique Focus. Hi, I'm here tonight with Emily, Stefan, and Grace, all seniors at Johns Hopkins, here to talk about hookup culture on college campuses. So I think the first thing that we really should talk about is how we would define hookup culture. Is this something new? Is it different? Is it problematic? I mean, overall, like, how do students interact on college campuses in terms of sexual behaviors and things nowadays?
I don't think it's necessarily new. I think it's always been an underlying part of American culture, at least. But I think now it's much more prevalent and much more popular and much more normalized than it ever was before.
Yeah, if I can field that question, I think there are a lot of apps and resources kind of available that make it very easy to kind of get at what you may want, whether that be sex, whether that be a relationship, that just makes it very accessible.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you want to chime in?
I think it's kind of just the new version. There was always some form of a hookup culture, and a lot of the new technologies just facilitate those interactions and make it a lot easier to meet new people.
Well, then that's my next question. So how do people meet people? I mean, are people mostly meeting when they're out? Are these people that they knew before or have in a class or interacted with before? Or is this happening usually the first time that they meet someone? Like, how does that dynamic work?
I think I still kind of meet people in a traditional way. It's either in class or a friend of a friend. I don't think I like actively go out on Facebook and try to like add a friend and then try to become friends with them after the fact. I think it's much more like, I try for the much more, I guess, natural way of just
organic,
organic, yeah.
Yeah. I think in terms of making friends, I would agree. In terms of looking for something more romantic, I think it's a little bit different, and you really like find that when you go out at night rather than in class.
Well, but then though, would you say like romantic is the right word, or are these things that are simply like so casual that, I mean, the next day it's what? Like, how does that usually pan out? Like, what is the dynamic with that person usually like when you're with them or when you meet them?
I mean, I think that depends on the two people or more, whatever it's called. I think it depends on what each person is looking for, or how drunk you were the night before, or what you actually ended up doing. Maybe you just kissed and then you went home and exchanged numbers, and like that's pretty cute. But if anything more happened, it really depends on what each person is looking for. Overall, if they're looking for something more serious, or if it really was just a one-night thing, you sort of have to talk about it and have that awkward conversation with that person, and that's what you have to do.
I mean, I personally like to start interactions face-to-face. Like, I don't think I've ever, like, even if using Tinder or something, I usually, like, would meet them and decide if there's, like, any type of connection at all before, like,
Going any step further.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't like doing anything with people in my classes, because then I have to see them. But just like, I think so, there's a lot around like going out at night or going to various social events that are good for meeting people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, you brought up something else I think that's significant, because you said like either if it could be something more serious, you have to talk about it, which, you know, does happen. There are people in relationships at this school, obviously. Some of them. But then the other side of it, you're like, okay, well then if it's casual, like you have to like make that clear too. How often is it like one or the other? I mean, it seems to be that more interactions, I mean, I could be wrong, but more interactions now seem to be casual. I mean, that's why we're talking about hookup culture.
Right.
So, you know, why has that happened? And then if it is something casual, how do you like delineate that it is like casual? I mean, how is that?
I think there are ways without talking about it to make it very clear it's casual. Like if someone leaves at 3 a.m., it's probably casual. But if you talk the next day and then you like go out to brunch, maybe not. You don't know. It really depends. But I think it all probably started like in the 60s, like sexual revolution, like freedom. That's like where it all came from.
History lesson.
History, yeah.
Hey, we need to go over it. And then like now we've sort of gotten to this point where that's super normalized, and that's college is like the first time you're not living at home and away from your parents, and so that's what happens.
Well, how much of this then would you guys say is problematic? Like the fact that this casual hookup culture relationship is so normalized. Do you think that everybody's just okay with this, or do you think that there are some major shortcomings to the fact that this has become the norm?
So I think the main thing is communication. So the only way you can really find out if something's casual or not is if you talk to the other person. I mean, like, even if there are signals, like, talking is basically always good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really agree with you there. I mean, it's not an easy conversation. It's oftentimes a very awkward conversation, but I think the earlier you nip it in the bud, I mean, the easier it is for both people kind of involved in that.
Yeah, but so then with like this communication, there's a lot of like people, if both people involved want it to be casual, then it can be casual, but really making sure that both sides are bringing the same thing to the table. Because frequently I think there's situations where somebody will be like, oh, I want to make this serious, and another person's like, I want to make it casual, and then they're like, okay, we can make this casual, but then they're just clearly not bringing the same things to the table, and that's like where a lot of the problems arise.
Right.
And how it doesn't work for people.
Right.
Yeah.
People's expectations kind of not being met.
Mm-hmm.
And how, I mean, I think that is often, I think the issue is a lot of times it's not only miscommunication, but people don't have that conversation. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think those different perceptions on both sides continue until the point where it sort of becomes an
Beyond
issue.
no return, yeah.
Exactly. So then why is it, I mean, this problem, as we just discussed, is a problem, this miscommunication problem is a problem a lot, because one of the individuals is, not interested in pursuing something more. So then the question is, like, why? Why is this so often like a wall that is hit? Why do so many people seem to be averse to engaging in something further after, like, having some kind of sexual interaction the first time? I mean, is that unique to Hopkins, or is this the thing at college campuses everywhere, people our age? I mean, why is this sort of phenomenon going on?
I mean, I think it's pretty prevalent to people our age, especially college age. I think maybe out of college it probably changes because then you're working and it's just a different culture. But in college, I think people feel like, I don't want to be limited in anything I do. Like, the college is supposed to be the time where you find yourself and you learn all these new things about yourself. And so I think hookup culture has become a part of that, and like there's this feeling that you don't want to limit yourself to any one person or any one experience.
Right.
Also, we just changed so much in college. Like, think back to freshman year. If you started dating someone freshman year, and just like the likelihood that you guys would have been able to change together and stay together this whole time is just crazy. And it does happen, of course, but I think a lot of people don't want to get started because they want to be able to grow by themselves and not kind of be limited by like satisfying another person's needs or working with someone else.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's also a view that relationships might be work. Like, you've heard the crazy girlfriend stereotype, like, oh, I have to text my girlfriend and she'll yell at me, or like things like that.
We can talk about that too.
Just like the way I think like women are viewed in relationships, the way men are viewed in relationships too by women, of different things they like have to do to keep their significant other happy. And so I think there's a averseness to that as well. Like, I don't want to have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about someone else.
Yeah, to a certain extent, they sort of have a negative stigma, like, a lot of the time. So then is there an in-between? Like, is there an in-between, like, nothing? Like, maybe not interacting anymore after that first interaction, and then having a committed relationship? I mean, is there any way to, like, go about sort of navigating a middle path?
Yeah.
I think you did a good job bringing it up earlier about how if both people are interested in keeping it casual, then that's definitely possible. You just have to make sure that both people are truly interested in that, and that there isn't sort of miscommunication.
Yeah. I think it's definitely doable, and I know people that have done it successfully. I mean, sometimes it's hard to keep the emotions out of it just biologically and naturally, but if both people are kind of committed to that, I don't think it's too difficult.
Right.
There's also the element of like sometimes you build to something. So initially maybe you don't know them at all and then you hook up, but then if you continue to hook up then you learn to know them and then you might realize that there's something there later on.
Right.
And so there is a certain number of like casual things that then turn serious.
So yeah, I mean, so then what I'm getting out of this, and this is, go ahead.
Right, that sounds like it's almost like progressing to dating in that kind of situation.
That's what I was going to bring up. So then is this backwards, and is that a bad thing? So you have like a sexual encounter first, and then you get to know each other, and then maybe you start dating. I mean, I feel like that's how most relationships are born now, and if we went to talk to our parents about that, they would probably think that was pretty messed up. So, I mean, not that we would like detail anything, but I think that that's a serious thing to think about, because then, I mean, is that wrong, or do some people perceive that as wrong? Do different generations perceive that as right or wrong? Because, I mean, that is, if you look at most couples that we know on campus, it started what would be the reverse of what used to be the norm. I mean, what do you...
I think it can be dangerous because there's a higher likelihood of miscommunication because you don't know the other person.
Right.
You don't know if they are mad at you, never want to speak to you again, or if they never respond to their text. And just like, there's also, if you are starting from that side, there's frequently a higher need for trust.
Yeah.
And there isn't any trust already built. And so those are like concerns, but I think as soon as you're aware, it's easy to address and doesn't actually have to limit any behavior.
And at the same time, if you both agree to it, if it's consensual, if you're both very content with the situation as it is now, I think that's honestly like comfortable, and there should be no reason for us to like judge it on any basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And each individual makes their own decisions for sure, but I think you brought up really good points about trust and there being larger room for like sort of mistakes to be made, or like the relationship to fall apart because you don't sort of have that like gradual build. But again, that goes back to like the culture of like we're busy, we're stressed, we're have a lot of other things going on. So there was something else I wanted to talk about in terms of, you brought up the whole like crazy girlfriend, and we talked about like one person wants to be more involved and the other doesn't. That's a common miscommunication. So what is it about the stigma of like for both sides, for girls and guys, that guys are never really interested and just sort of like want to bump around and experience a lot, and then it's always the girl that wants a relationship and the guy assumes that the girl wants the relationship? I mean, I think those don't necessarily hold, but those are like common perceptions. So I mean, is that problematic? Does that contribute to the miscommunication issue? How often is that true? Is it justified?
I think the perception that every girl wants a relationship is outdated and absurd, I think, in this. Hookup culture is on both sides. Girls just want to hook up, guys just want to
But do most people recognize that as a question?
No, I don't think they do. I think the assumption that, I think guys still have that ingrained in them, that every girl wants a relationship, so they have to cut it off quickly, never talk to them again, and not make eye contact when they see them, which just makes things like way more awkward, and like, it's just ridiculous. And it doesn't have to be that way, and so I mean, I think it's just like an outdated perception, and it doesn't hold true at all with most of the women I know on this campus and other campuses.
I think it also like crosses orientation too. I feel like gay culture as a whole has a reputation of being very much hedonistic and sex driven, because there are two males involved in that, and then I know that there's a lot of stereotypes about lesbian culture, about two women coming together and them moving in together right afterwards, and both of these are awful assumptions of like how relationships kind of work in this day and age.
I think a lot of those stereotypes come back to communication though, and like women in general are socialized more to communicate, and so part of the stereotype of wanting a relationship is I think a woman is more likely to bring up the conversation of like, what is this? Which can frequently be misinterpreted as somebody saying, we need to make this more.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of fear around having the conversation in the first place because you're afraid that the conversation will send signals.
Right, because those assumptions are already in place, so it's dangerous territory no matter like how you approach it.
I think we're also just very averse as our generation to labels as a whole. Like the more and more I read about it, the less and less people like enjoy putting labels, and they're very useful for like categorizing things, but they do delimit things pretty significantly.
Right, yeah, I mean there's more conflict when it's vague as to what is going on as well though, so.
I think it's like Facebook heard it, that it's complicated.
It's complicated, I know.
So much.
You should just like wear that. Like,
All the time.
Okay, well, I mean, I think we visited most of the topics that pertain to this, and I think you guys offered a lot of insight, and it is really interesting, and it's very, very relevant to social culture, especially on college campuses nowadays. So thanks very much for coming and sharing your thoughts, and that's all for tonight on Politique Focus.